The official report is cold concrete. Subject Doug Martin. Age 36. Status deceased. The final play call wasn't made on a field of painted grass, but in a stranger's house, under the sterile glare of police flashlights. He was disoriented, a ghost haunting the suburbs of his own life. This was the end of the highlight reel. The anatomy of a collapse begins here, not with a fumble, but with a mind coming undone. The man they called the muscle hamster, a force of nature who carried the hopes of a city on his shoulders, became unresponsive in the back of a police car. Pause. The silence that followed was louder than any stadium roar. His legacy wasn't just the 5,000 rushing yards. It was the invisible invoice for every single one of them. An invoice paid with memory, with stability, with life itself. The investigation into his death is a formality. The real postmortem audit is of a system that builds titans and leaves broken men in its wake. Fame was the gilded cage. The game was the slow-acting poison. The final truth is that the most brutal hits happened long after he left the field. The first public fracture appeared in 2016, a 4-game suspension. The official reason was a violation of the league's substance abuse policy, a clean corporate term for a dirty, personal war. Martin issued a statement. He announced he was entering a treatment facility. The media narrative was one of redemption, a hero facing his demons, a temporary setback. But this wasn't a chapter in a comeback story. It was the prologue to an inevitable tragedy. The substances weren't the disease. They were the symptom, a desperate attempt to quiet the noise inside his own skull. The noise left behind by a decade of collisions. Each helmet-to-helmet impact was a down payment on future chaos. While the league sold tickets and jerseys, a debt was accumulating in the soft tissue of his brain. He sought help for the addiction, but no one offered a cure for the cause. This was the fatal mistake. Treating the smoke while the fire raged, unseen, deep within the architecture of his mind. The meat grinder of fame demanded a price, and the payments were just beginning. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a potential verdict whispered in medical journals and support groups for broken players. The disorientation, the erratic behavior, these were not moral failings. They were the echoes of a career spent running into brick walls for money and glory. His family saw the man disappearing long before his body gave out. They were witnessing the anatomy of a slow-motion collapse, a private war fought behind the closed doors of a life that had lost its script. The transition from muscle hamster, a public brand, to just a man was a brutal demotion. The world that once paid millions to watch him run now looked away as he stumbled. This wasn't just a struggle. Pause. It was an exorcism in reverse where the demon was not being cast out, but was slowly taking over the house. A medical emergency was met with a law enforcement protocol. The detainment was the final interception of his life. He became unresponsive not on a field of glory, but in the cold custody of the state. He was 36 years old. The subsequent investigation, the officers placed on administrative leave. It's all part of the machine that processes such events. It turns a mutilated fate into a case file. The headlines spoke of a former star's demise, but the truth is colder. The strength that earned him millions, the power to run through men, was useless against the shadows in his own mind. His bitter testament is not in the record books. It's a warning, written in the silence of his absence. The game gives you everything, and then it takes it all back, with interest. The empire of the body crumbles, leaving behind only the wreckage. The family statement was not a press release. It was a bitter testament, a final, desperate attempt to pull a man's soul back from the cold, procedural language of a police report. They spoke of a private war, fought behind the closed doors of a life the public thought it owned. The search for help, the frantic calls, the slow creeping disorientation that finally broke its banks. He fled his own home, a fortress built on touchdowns and glory. Now just another room he didn't recognize. The man who could break 4 tackles was now broken by the phantoms in his own mind. Pause. This wasn't a fall from grace. It was a controlled demolition that had lost its blueprint. The family's words painted a portrait of love and helplessness, a picture of holding a hand that was already slipping away. They were trying to explain the inexplicable, trying to put a human face on a statistic that the league would prefer to bury in its vast green graveyard of forgotten heroes. Their grief became a public document, an inventory of pain for the world to audit. The post-mortem audit began. 2 officers on administrative leave, a standard procedure that feels anything but standard when a life is extinguished. The official inquiry promised answers, but the real questions were unanswerable by any coroner or committee. They were etched into the very architecture of the game itself. The acronym whispered in locker rooms and medical offices, CTE, hung over the case file like a shroud. Each highlight reel of a helmet-to-helmet collision now looked less like a display of athletic prowess and more like an installment payment on a fatal debt. The public demanded a simple villain, a single fatal error, substance abuse, a bad decision. But the truth was a far more terrifying monster. It was a system, a meat grinder of glory that returns its heroes in pieces, if at all. His legacy was now a fractured thing. The rushing yards and the Pro Bowl selections on one side of the ledger. On the other, a 36-year-old man, unresponsive on the cold floor of a stranger's home. Pause. The final box score was in, and it was a loss for everyone. The nickname was a joke at first, Muscle Hamster. A playful descriptor for a 5'9" running back who moved with the compact fury of a cannonball. It stuck. It sold jerseys. It became a brand, a caricature that was easy to love and easier to discard. But the cage was real, its bars forged from the impossible expectations of his own past brilliance. This is the anatomy of that decline, the post-mortem audit of a career that promised immortality and delivered a cautionary tale. His career ledger reads like a fever chart from a terminal patient. 2 colossal spikes that touch the heavens, separated by deep, desolate valleys of injury and inconsistency. We must return to 2012. A rookie supernova, he amasses 1,454 rushing yards and 11 touchdowns. He is not just the future, he is the present, the franchise cornerstone. The roar of the crowd at Raymond James Stadium is a physical force, a wave that carries him, insulating him from doubt. He is a blur of motion, a human pinball ricocheting off giants. For a season, he is perfect. Then, the silence, the cold, sterile quiet of the MRI machine, the nagging pain in his shoulder that becomes a constant companion, a whisper of his own physical fragility. His body, the very instrument of his genius, begins its long, slow betrayal. He would climb the mountain one more time, a feat of sheer, stubborn will. The 2015 season was a resurrection narrative written in sweat and blood, 1,402 yards, a first-team All-Pro selection. It was a defiant roar against the dying of the light, a final, brilliant flash before the inevitable darkness. It was also a curse. This performance, born from a desperate attempt to recapture the magic of his youth, reset the baseline. The league, the fans, and worst of all, he himself now expected this version of Doug Martin to be the permanent standard. An impossible benchmark for a body already scarred by the game's brutality. Glory is a drug with diminishing returns. The second high is never as pure as the first, and the come down is a fall from a much greater height. The pressure wasn't just on the field, measured in yards and first downs. It was in the mirror in the pre-dawn hours. It was in the quiet moments after the stadium lights went dark and the adulation faded into an echoing silence. The playbook, a Bible of X's and O's, had meticulous diagrams for every defensive scheme, every blitz package. But it offered no page, no strategy for the opponent that lived inside his own head. The NFL is a meat grinder of fame, a brutalist machine designed to extract every ounce of physical prowess until none is left. It has no protocol for auditing the soul. His success smelled of fresh-cut grass and the ink on a multi-million-dollar contract. It also carried the faint, metallic scent of fear. The fear of not being the man from the 2012 highlight reels. The public saw the fumbles, the missed games, the declining yards per carry. They saw a player losing a step, a commodity depreciating in value. What they didn't see was the invisible erosion, the slow-motion collapse happening from within. The crushing weight of a legacy he was still trying to build while simultaneously trying to live up to it. He was a two-time first-team All-Pro, a Pro Bowler, and by the end, a man running from his own paw's highlight reel. The ghost of his former self was the one opponent he could never outrun, a phantom that tackled him harder than any linebacker. The 2016 suspension for substance abuse was not the beginning of the end. It was a public flare, a distress signal from a sinking ship, illuminating a fire that had been burning in the dark for years. It was a desperate attempt to numb a pain that had nothing to do with torn ligaments or bruised ribs. The system treated the symptom, the public violation. The disease, however, was left to metastasize in the shadows of his gilded cage.